Hello, everybody. I hope you're having had a good weekend, and now we're ready to go on to the next week here. And let's see. So announcements. So I'm changing things around a little bit, mostly around the final exam. And the reason I'm changing them is because I'm looking at the second half of the semester and I'm realizing that I didn't really have it scheduled right. I love doing projects and I think that's great, but I just didn't have it scheduled right. So now I'm changing things around a little bit to stretch out the material that we have and to have more time with BigQuery and more time with Data Looker, and also to rewrite the way that I do the projects, where we have a proposal, we have a dashboard with a presentation, all that kind of stuff. But this is an online class, so before I had all these days scheduled for in-class presentations. We don't have class, so anyhow, so I'm changing that around. But the first impact that this comes up on is the final exam. So rather than have the final exam during spring break, what I've done is I've postponed it to after spring break. And hopefully that helps you out a little bit and makes it a little bit easier. I could change these dates around if people don't really, care for them. If that doesn't work for you guys, let me know. Happy to work with you. And yeah, so anyhow, let's look at that. But anyhow, so after spring break on the final exam. So the thing that this week's class is all about. Let's see, it's about. Let me get it right. It's about database design, and the iBook does a good job talking about strong and weak entities, supertypes and subtypes, and all that kind of stuff, and modeling conventions and all that. But you know this class has a dual purpose. There's two groups of students in this class. One group is interested in being analytics people. And for them, discovery, meh, not really that interesting. But other groups are more interested in the idea of using these technologies to build applications, to work with organizations to come up with interesting new uses for technology. And for that group of students, this idea of discovery is really important and has seen a big change over time too. We used to have much more structured approach to figuring out what databases should do, what fields we should have, how they should work, all that stuff. We don't really do that anymore. Now we're much more interested in agile methodologies, and those agile methodologies are different. And so for class this week, I want to just talk about this idea of working on requirements and coming up with actual ways that applications are going to work. And the interesting thing about it is that it's not really an immensely technical topic. It's much more of a communications topic. So working with people to figure out how they can do their jobs better and how we can use technology to make people more efficient, more effective in their jobs. So, with that in mind, we start with this idea of the process of determining requirements. Well, what requirements are? They're the things that an application has to do before it's useful to anyone. And so, and the person who generally does this is a systems analyst. And a systems analyst has to be kind of a different kind of a person because they need to have both an organizational perspective to their work, to their knowledge, to what they enjoy doing, and they need to understand something about the technology so that they know when an answer is really important to zero in on and when one is when, yeah, we can do that kind of a thing. So I start out with this slide because I think it's interesting. The characteristics of a good systems analyst. Impertinence. You need to be able to talk to people who are probably your senior, either in years or in capabilities, and say, Why do you do that? That's a hard thing for some people to do. And yet, that's really important because it's the questioning that starts the whole process of determining what the requirements are for a system. The person you may be interacting with may think that they have a really good idea of exactly what this application needs to do, but that's not good enough because one person having a good idea doesn't mean anything. The good ideas need to be put into a format where lots of people, both developers as well as other people in the organization, can understand what's the point. Why are we doing this? What do we want to do with this thing? So impertinence is kind of a good way to think about it. Impartiality, considering all the issues to find the best solution. How do you not be swayed by one very powerful, very forceful person to do things the way they wanted to? Thinking about, not only is it important to do the right thing, but we need to find what works for the greatest number of people. Relaxing constraints, assuming anything is possible, and eliminate the infeasible. How do we say, no, we don't have to worry about that. We can deal with other things. Attention to detail, finding a way to fit everything together, and then reframing, challenging yourself to look at the organization in new ways, because that's where the good ideas are going to come from. Bunch of organizational components that you need to understand. Well, you need to think about what the organization does, and not just from a vague understanding. You really need to understand what it is. What's the main thrust of what you do? And I'll give you an example of this. If you think that Google is about search, you're wrong. Google was originally about search, but it has morphed to become an advertising company. Advertising pays the bills. Search is what brings people in to see the ads. And so, thinking about what the organization really does, why do people come to them versus somebody else? That's an important part. What information do people need to do their jobs? How do you keep track of that? What data is out there? How do you transform and store that data to make it useful to people? What are the dependencies and sequences that have to happen around that data? That's a key component. And knowing where the data comes from and how it gets worked with is a big part of it. Data handling and processing, business rules. Business rules trump everything, and a lot of times we'll run into something that we really want to do from a technical perspective, but you know what? Doesn't match what the business actually does and the way that the business handles these things. So business rules always trump. We don't want to build systems that need to change the way the business does business. The way that the business does business needs to be captured by the systems, and that's an important distinction. Policies and guidelines, market requirements, the environment that the company operates in, all those things are important elements to understand, and then the key events that affect the data and their values when they occur. That's all important to understand from an organizational perspective before you start developing a new application. So how do you figure out what people do? This is something it's a hard thing for people to do because you can't just look at the organization from one perspective. You need to look at it from lots of different perspectives and how do people do their jobs. That's a difficult thing to understand also. But if you're curious, if you like talking to people, if you like to interact with people and can talk to them about their jobs without people feel like you're threatening their jobs, that's another side of this thing, then this can be a really fun job to have. So direct observation of workers is a really good way to figure out how people actually do what they do. And you know, if and you get it, and it can be much more accurate than an interview, because in an interview you're kind of dealing with idealized scenarios of, you know, user presents themselves, and we do this, we do this, we do this, and then we're all done. But if you watch people do their jobs, then you'll see what happens, you know, when a user comes up and they aren't quite prepared to go through the final checkout or whatever it is, or they, you know, there's special situations that have to happen, and the workers involved with this have figured out how to get this done, despite, in many cases, despite the requirements of the system. But until you see what those edge cases are and how users work within the guidelines that they have to get their jobs done, it's really hard to figure out what people actually do. So, you know, watching direct observation workers is a really good way to keep track of things, build a better understanding of what people do. Analyzing procedures and other documents. You know, when you go to develop a new application, whether it's a new database in a bank or an insurance company or whatever, one of the things that you want to do is go around and look for documents, look for papers, and pick up those papers, whether those are invoices, paper invoices, or they're HR documents, or, you know, whatever they are. Picking up those pieces of paper really helps, because on them you'll notice things like key terms that may not make a whole lot of sense to you, but they're the way that the organization describes what it does. So if you have an invoice that has product IDs on it, and you have part numbers, some places are called product IDs, other places are called part numbers. Well, if your organization calls them part numbers, call them part numbers. If they call them product IDs, call them product IDs. But until you go around and pick up those forms that people use on a daily basis, it's hard to figure out what the right words are and how companies do the business that they do through the documents that they work with. And you can compare across them. If in one, on your invoice it calls it a part number, but in all the databases it's called product ID, maybe you should bring that together. You know, make it easier for people to use the right words to do what needs to be done. Let's see, identifying key people of a current system. You know, all the paper documents go through one office or one person who checks them to make sure that the you know, money is available in the account, or the person or organization that's buying things has available credit line to buy things from you. You know, if that's the case, you know, you need to meet with that person and find out what it is they do, how they make their decision. Special information processing circumstances you might not otherwise have identified. That's easy to do by looking at documents and looking at the way people do things. Now, I said that Agile is the way that we're going to be designing most documents these days. Well, you know, Agile is different. Agile is all about delivering working software, you know, from a software development perspective. It's about working with people to come up with solutions to problems. And so how do we translate that working with people perspective to system analysis and design? Well, you know, it's these kind of steps that make it easier for people to use the agile methodologies that we do with software development in the area of system analysis and design. And things like working with people who actually use the system to find out what they do. developing prototypes for them to work with, writing down, having people write down what they do every day, and then organizing that on some sort of a board so that people can keep track of what the system needs to do and who's going to actually do it. These are all key components of the agile methodologies, and can be very helpful in translating the way that we develop software these days onto the way that we develop systems these days. So I hope this is interesting to you. I'm not going to read through it, but I'll post all these slides, by the way, too. Prototyping. Prototyping is one of these things that comes out of the agile methodology, where instead of working out requirements with a big long list of everything the system needs to do, what we can do instead is to get that group of users together, just like in the previous slide, and then talk to them for a while, get a decent idea of what the system needs to do, then build it. Now, it may not be working completely. There may not be a database behind the web pages, or there may not be, complete functionality behind everything. And we're certainly not going to address edge cases in an early prototype. But if we can present this to users and say, does this early prototype capture the essence of what you want to do, what the system needs to be able to do? This is called a minimum viable product. And a minimal viable product, or an MVP, people call it, is just kind of it addresses the central issue that this new system is supposed to do. And it does it in such a way to, the goal of it is not to have anybody say, okay, you're all done. The goal is to start a conversation amongst the users and have the users be able to say, well, this looks good, but does it do this too? And by having this prototype in front of users, you can do a whole bunch of things. You can get very early feedback, which is, when you get feedback early, it's a lot easier to implement the feedback. But we can also find out if we've missed any requirements. If we present an application to users and they say, yeah, this is good, but how do we... And use a system analyst is like, wait a second, I didn't even know we needed to do that. And the users say, oh yeah, we do that all the time. That's a requirement that somehow or other slipped through the cracks and didn't get into your requirements documentation. That happens all the time because people are people, and they do their job, and they get used to doing their job, and they forget to tell you about that stuff. So prototyping methodology, well, think about the problem. What's the initial requirements for this problem? Can we develop a prototype that sort of does that? And then take that working prototype and then implement it and use the prototype. It's more like show or demo or make it available to the users. And if you're going to do a big system and using lots of cloud-based databases and all this kind of stuff, for a prototype, you may go to GoDaddy and just quickly whack together an e-commerce site, if that's what you're building, and bring that GoDaddy prototype. And GoDaddy, I use them because they have all these prototyping tools out there where you can put together small business systems that, yeah, they work, but they're not going to work in a big high workload environment. So but using those prototypes can be a really quick way to get something into your users' hands. So implement and use the prototype, but take note of all of the problems that your users look at it and say, oh, this is great, but write down what the but is, because that but is the key to going from a prototype to an actual system. And so those buts are gold when you're developing a new system. And it's the insights that you get from your users who know their system inside and out. That's the key to doing a good job. So that's the gold part. And then take the insights that you get from your users and use those to develop a new prototype. Take it through another iteration. Bring it back to your users again. Show it to them again. In an agile environment, your users work with you really often. And by that, I mean, sometimes it could be on a daily basis. Sometimes it's weekly. If it slips to bi-weekly, that's a bad sign, because you want to be working with your user community really frequently, so that they can keep track of what you're doing, and they can give you feedback on what needs to be changed, and what works and what doesn't work, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so I'm going to post these, and just to get them out there to you, I'm also going to post some other documents, some other pages in here. And these are drafts, and dates in these are pretty good. It's a draft. I'm trying to reframe the way that I do projects for this more of a a database class kind of a format. And how do we work with dashboards, and how do we do an online class where we've got dashboards? By the way, 4/27 is our last class. Classes end like the next Monday or something like. Oh, see, it got me again. I have Tuesday, Thursday classes. So when I say last class, that means the last Tuesday and Thursday. But we also have class on, I think it's the 1st, which is Monday. So that really should be the first Monday, because what I'm trying to do is make it during the last day of classes, not class. We don't have class. And then a project report, and this is an initial draft, so I'm prototyping with you guys, looking for your feedback. And of what we're doing with this. And so my problem is, when the artifact that you create for a project in this type of a class is a dashboard on Data Looker, how do we fit that into the traditional academic capstone project methodology? The reason I want to do that is because what I've found, I've done tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds. I think it's like 350 projects and theses over my career. And what I've found is that if people get used to the process before they have to do it for real, then they do a much better job at it. So if I can make you work through this process that we use around capstones as part of a course, then when it comes time for you to do your actual capstone project, it's not such a shock to you. Back in the old days, people would crank through their courses, traditional courses and everything. And then it would come to their capstone project time, and you would say, "So, what are you going to do your capstone project on?" And they would say, "Oh yeah, the project." Forgotten all about it. And then they would have a tough time because it was just such a foreign process to get that done. So I want to avoid that. So yeah, so this is just something to work on, and I hope I'll change it around some and come up with better formats and everything. But this is what my initial thoughts are. This is my MVP. So take care, everybody, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.